It's turning out to be quite an AI week this week. On Thursday, Microsoft is going to make an announcement, and that will probably be that it is integrating GPT-4 into its productivity suites. I'll be sending out a newsletter about that to premium members later in the week. But I've been curious about something else that's been happening over the past few days. So these chatbots, GPT-3, GPT-4, GPT-3.5, they're large language models. And large language models have shown that they're kind of quite powerful in many, many ways. But until recently, and this is important, they required massive computing infrastructure to run. I mean, some of the world's largest supercomputer clusters were used in training them, and very big systems had to be used to actually get them to run and respond to our queries. And that's what's behind OpenAI and their API business and so on. So a few weeks ago, Facebook released a large language model called LLaMA, and it worked about as well, some cases better, based on the benchmarks as GPT-3 or 3.5. But here was the thing, LLaMA was a much, much smaller model, order of magnitude or less smaller than its rival models, yet performed just as well. And one of the implications of that was that you could potentially train LLaMA on a single GPU of the kind that I have in my big Mac here. And then running inference off it could be on even smaller machines. And that's pretty remarkable. Then what happened a few days after LLaMA was released was that someone leaked the model across BitTorrent, and LLaMAs were out in the wild. And so what we've now seen is people tinker with them. And a British guy called Simon Willison figured out how to get LLaMA to run on his MacBook Pro laptop. It was a pretty high-end version of the MacBook Pro, but it's a laptop nonetheless, and it's not, a supercomputer in a cloud hosting data center somewhere. And then since then, I've seen somebody has managed to get LLaMA to run on a Pixel 6 phone, which is not even a 2023 phone. It was first released in 2021, and that's pretty remarkable. So what does this actually mean? I'm going to talk about three key upsides. I've referred to what one of the downsides would be in one of my essays back on Exponential View, which you can go back and find, but let's just look at the three upsides. So the first one, I think, is about access and democratization. So once this thing is now available in open source, and I'm sure it's not going to be just be LLaMA, right? Stability AI will no doubt release one, and others will follow suit. Once these things can be run on lower end hardware and ultimately on phones and cheap devices, you vastly democratize access. And that means that these tools can be made widely available in poorer countries, global south, and start to be used in industry and education and so on. The second thing that I think that's really interesting is that they can be run within your own private enclave. So one of the things I love about my Apple iPhone is that my photos live on the phone, and all the machine learning that is done to tag and identify and cluster photos happens on the phone. One of the things I get nervous about in using ChatGPT, which I use quite a lot for my work, is I don't really want to put confidential material. So I'm a bit circumspect about how I use it and where my data will end up going. And I'm sure lots of companies feel the same. So you could get to this space where you end up having systems that can run locally on your devices. But the third thing that I think is interesting is that if the price comes down quite a lot, you can start to fine-tune these systems in quite positive ways for specific contexts, specific cultural, linguistic, social environments. In other words, the system that might relate to professionals in Japan might get trained slightly differently to the one that's used for healthcare in Brazil, differently for the one that is used in primary education in the UK. The costs come down enough to do that kind of important fine-tuning. So I think there's a really interesting bifurcation happening at the moment. The super large, heavily hosted, API-driven models that we are largely using right now, and this open source, bottoms-up model that puts these technologies everywhere very, very rapidly. It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. I will be writing more about this for members of my newsletter, Exponential View, in the coming weeks and months.